The world is still reeling from the effects of the 2008 global financial crisis, and many countries are still working to recover. China was hit particularly hard by the crisis, but was also one of the first major countries to move on from the problem. After the crisis in 2008, China experienced an 8.7% and 10.3% economic growth in 2009 and 2010, respectively. They even helped some countries escape the economic downturn. But with time, China began to experience a stall in its economy. Their mortgage crisis began in 2020 when Beijing decided to take a step in cutting down excessive borrowing from developers in the country. The crisis then escalated in 2021 when the country's most indebted developer, Evergrande, tried its utmost best to get some cash to pay off its lenders. The ripple effect is being felt throughout China, and there is no end in sight. Banks are failing, developers are going bankrupt, and homeowners are defaulting on their loans. This is Savvy Economists, and in this video, we'll take a look at the damages the mortgage crisis will do to China, the Chinese people, and the Chinese economy. Let's start with the failing Chinese bank. One of the most apparent damages to occur due to the mortgage crisis is the failures of banks. In China, the number of banks that have failed has increased from the hundreds to the thousands. The government has been forced to bail out many of these banks, and many have had to be shut down. According to a news report from Bloomberg, it reads in a worst-case scenario, due to the plunge in the confidence level of the nation's housing market, China's banks stand to face $350 billion in mortgage losses. Not only have Chinese banks been hit hard by the mortgage crisis, but foreign banks have also been affected. Foreign banks have had to shut down branches in China, and many Chinese banks have had to close foreign operations because of the economic downturn. In 2014, the chief economist at the Agricultural Bank of China's Yang Songzuo warned that China banks could face a rising financial difficulty. He stated that all these would result from more bad loans given out. Yang also said that the housing market could face an imminent plummet in price due to excessive supply. It's no news now that all these have started happening. During the first half of 2021, the four largest state-owned banks in China closed down up to 187 service locations and offices due to the looming crisis. Also, there has been a recent protest in the city of Jingzhou as the masses who had deposited their money in four rural banks had their bank account frozen since April 2022. Defaults and foreclosures. As a result of the mortgage crisis, there has been a dramatic increase in the number of homeowners defaulting on their loans. Many homeowners defaulted on their loans as early as 2021. Unfortunately, the mortgage crisis brought many people who were on the brink of financial disaster to their breaking point. Many homeowners could not continue making their mortgage payments and were forced to default. The situation worsened because many banks tried to collect the money they owed as quickly as possible. Many homeowners were forced to choose between missing a mortgage payment and being unable to pay for food or medical care for their families. Unfortunately, many people defaulted on their loans, and the banks began foreclosing many properties. As the mortgage crisis progressed, the number of homeowners who defaulted and had their properties foreclosed on increased dramatically. Collapse of the real estate market. The mortgage crisis has started affecting China's real estate market in several ways. First, it caused the prices of properties to plummet. Property owners couldn't sell or rent their properties because they couldn't afford the payments. They tried to sell at a lower price, but potential buyers couldn't come up with the necessary down payments. The Chinese real estate market is now experiencing a collapse, and this is due to a combination of political and economic factors. Governmental policies have led to increased home ownership. At the same time, economic conditions have resulted in a decline in demand for housing. As a result, investors have been unable to sell their properties. This has resulted in a lack of supply and price increases. As of 2016, prices had declined by as much as 30%. The real estate market's collapse is one of the first indications that the mortgage crisis has spread its tentacles across the country. Collapse of the construction industry. The construction industry in China was once the backbone of the economy, but the housing market's collapse has hurt this industry, which is now on the verge of becoming one of the weakest sectors in the country. The COVID-19 pandemic was one of the critical factors that caused this crisis. Many projects have been stalled as a result of the pandemic. China at Evergrande Group, which controls over 35% of the country's development projects, now facing over $300 million in financial obligations. They also have halted hundreds of uncompleted commercial and residential building projects due to the crisis. The Chinese government tried to help out, but it was too late. By the time the government realized how serious the problem was, there wasn't enough money, as the country was also experiencing an economic downturn. The collapse has made many construction workers lose their jobs. This, in turn, caused a dramatic increase in unemployment. Many home buyers have now refused to pay their mortgage on properties they bought from developers. Many of these buyers have now been given an ultimatum that not until construction activities begin again they will hold on to their money. As the mortgage crisis wears on, it is becoming obvious that the problem in China is much bigger than anyone had anticipated. Who is to blame for the mortgage crisis? It's easy to point fingers when something goes wrong, and the mortgage crisis in China is no different. So who is to blame for this mess? There are a few groups that could be held responsible. First, there are the lenders who gave out loans to people who couldn't afford them. Then there are the borrowers who took out loans they knew they couldn't afford. And finally, there are the government officials who turned a blind eye to the problem until it was too late. All of these groups played a role in creating the mortgage crisis, and all of them will have to suffer the consequences. The Chinese people are already feeling the pain, and the economy is sure to feel a ripple effect as well. So who do you think is to blame for the mortgage crisis in China? Conclusion: China's mortgage market is too big to fail, and options for the government to deal with the ever-expanding problem are getting ever more complicated. The situation remains unresolved, and the longer it takes to find a solution, the further China's economy is being dragged down. The mortgage crisis in China is still ongoing, and there are no signs that it will end anytime soon. We hope you enjoyed watching the video. Do you have any replies or suggestions? Kindly drop them in the comments section. Don't forget to give a thumbs up to the video and subscribe to our channel to enjoy more useful information. Thank you for listening.